My name is Anneka Herre, and I am the curator and technical producer for Urban Video Project. What we do at Urban Video Project, or UVP, is outdoor, large-scale, public video art projections. And we do that year-round at our main venue, which is at the Everson Museum of Art in the Plaza. We project year-round onto the facade of the Everson Museum of Art. We do that every Thursday through Saturday, year-round, regardless of weather. We also have another element, which we call UVP Mobile, which is basically a mobile projector unit. The projector is massive. It is capable of producing a very large and very bright image, and with the help of a truck with a lift gate and a platform and a really big generator, we can project almost anywhere. And in fact, we have. We projected onto the facade of the warehouse just last year. Syracuse has a really deep history with video art, going back to Bill Viola when he was here in the late 60s as a student at Syracuse University. He also had his first solo show at the Everson Museum of Art. The Everson Museum of Art was, in fact, the first museum in the country to hire a full-time video curator. So there is a deep history of video art in Syracuse and in the central New York region. Our role is one of making art that frequently does not have an existence because of its technological nature out in the public arena, making that kind of art available within public space. Our role in the I-81 installation is not totally determined yet. Right now, what we are talking about is projecting onto some custom-designed fabricated scrims or another projection surface underneath the interstate and using the infrastructure as a support in some way for that. A lot of, ultimately what we do is going to really depend on the needs and desires of the artist and the collaborative team that is putting all of this together. So we're not totally sure what the Urban Video Project role in that is going to be, but we have done sort of guerrilla or mobile projections in the past, and so we'll be using that as a kind of starting point or model, but it's really going to depend on the vision of the artists and working together with them and with the collaborative team, with the architecture students, to see what comes out of that whole process. The Urban Video Project has a kind of interesting history. We have been around in our current instantiation since about 2008, 2009, doing permanently installed video projections around downtown Syracuse. But the project actually started, it grew out of a graduate seminar that was being taught by the artist Carrie Mae Weems at Syracuse University for art students. The title of the class was Social Studies 101. And in that, the class really discussed the concept of art as a social practice and things like the current interventionist movement in art and the idea of public intervention as a modality of art practice was being really aggressively explored, researched, and in fact put into practice by the students. And so a group of three students in that class, got together, and they essentially formed what became Urban Video Project. And what they were doing at that time was guerrilla installations, guerrilla projections. They were projecting using boat batteries out of the back of a van onto the sides of buildings, onto snowbanks, which we have many of in Syracuse, New York, of course. And so it was very guerrilla in nature. It was very socially charged because whenever you project onto a surface, a lot of different things are happening. You're questioning the boundaries of public and private. You're questioning property boundaries to some extent, and what it means to project. You know, projection is just light, moving image, in some cases sound, but that ephemeral medium does have something to do with territory, with property. And so I think that there's always something inherently social and political, at least small p political, when you are projecting into an outdoor space. And so it did start as something that was very socially engaged, and I feel like we have, in some ways, continued that, because there's something inherently socially engaged about bringing something which is traditionally something which is traditionally reserved for the media, for corporations who have access, et cetera, which is high-end technologies. Video technologies, audio technologies. This is something that that we're all very involved with, but traditionally it has not been something that the private citizen could easily access. And so video, it has in some sense been very socially engaged and very political from the very beginning. One way of addressing some of the issues that come up with the I-81 divide, which in the case of Syracuse is a pretty sharply town and gown divide. And the thinking behind Urban Video Project, once it was determined that it was going to be permanent venues in downtown Syracuse, because it is and continues to be affiliated with Syracuse University, was a way, exploring a way of bridging that divide. And I feel like we have, in our programming, so that was the kind of very, in some ways, simple or naive thinking about it, right? Because we're kind of inserting this university arm out into the city. But that has become more complicated, more developed, and much richer as time has gone on, and we've thought about the audiences that we have for what we do in downtown Syracuse. And so the audience is potentially very large. And so, for instance, with something like Urban Cinematheque, which is something that we do every year, we screen a film down in downtown Syracuse. We screen a film on the site of the Everson Museum of Art, and it becomes a great opportunity for students to encounter the city, and for the residents of the city to encounter the students. And there it does tend to be a lack of mixing, that students tend not to be very familiar with the downtown. And so you don't get that mixing, you get that crystallization, you get that divide. And it becomes a way of bridging that. Our goal is to find some kind of shared ground to make a place. It really is, Urban Video Project really is about placemaking, and the attempt to find ways in which we reach the broadest possible public. And in cases where you have a divide that is a binary divide, making those borders bleed and creating a space for encounter. Video really does historically represent the first time consumers, which means private citizens, had access to the technologies which produced the moving image, which has always traditionally been associated with either Hollywood and the entertainment industry, or media and the industry of journalism. So it became, in some sense, video is very inherently a political or socially engaged practice, because it is arguably, and at least potentially, a form of empowerment whereby private individuals, artists specifically here, but also anyone, is able to take up that power of the moving image and turn it to their own ends. And so it really does lend itself to creating not just works of beauty, but works that have a social engagement, that are of the moment, that are topical. Urban Video Project right now is a two-part project. We have, on the one hand, our permanent video installation down at the Everson Museum of Art. We have an enclosure, an environmental enclosure, which is permanently installed up on the roof of the steam plant, actually, and projects over the plaza onto the facade of the Everson. So we have that location, and that is a possible a possible location for our involvement with this project, though it is not actually under the I-81 infrastructure. And in that space, we've actually been working for quite a while, especially. A thing to keep in mind is that with video, there are many constraints, there are many factors that are really going to determine how successful the installation is, and how ready both the imagery is to work within those constraints and also the designers who are creating the designers who are creating what is being projected onto, or the kind of immediate parameters of it. So some imagery can work very well, even if, let's say, there's some warping of the image that can't be corrected. Maybe you're actually working with the idea of a warped image or a non-flat projection. That's a possibility, although that also creates additional complications. But so it's important, that the artists have a kind of understanding of the constraints, and it's also important the designers have an understanding of the constraints. For it to be successful, ambient light is a major constraining factor. At the Everson Plaza, for instance, we have some very large floodlights that are trained on the plaza, and we have actually worked with the county so that on projection nights, those are scheduled to have only 3. They're scheduled, the county has it scheduled so that there are only 3 on the nights on which we project. The rest of the week, there are 6 lights on. It's actually, it's possible to see the image, but the image is very washed out. Similarly, audio is a complex thing to install. I don't know whether or not that might be part of a mobile installation, but in hard, bright spaces, which are produced by concrete, you get a lot of echoing. Placement of speakers can cause phase cancellation if they are basically aimed at each other. And then, of course, you have ambient traffic sounds, and so that's something to keep in mind in terms of determining volume level. So there are all kinds of constraining factors that you might encounter working underneath I-81. And it really is going to involve a lot of integration at the technological level, which is what UVP is providing, and at the design level, and then also at the artistic level, so that it all comes together and produces a good end product. So, for instance, the nature of the imagery, etc., needs to be probably fairly abstract, and the design should be able to accommodate that. You are not going to get an image which is going to be ultra legible. For instance, if you're projecting directly onto concrete, concrete is going to, any kind of texture really is going to make the lines somewhat less crisp. It's going to give you a slightly softer image. Other constraints are throw distances for projectors. That needs to be worked out very well in advance. When we did the mobile projection at the warehouse last year, we had to talk with the city, who then in turn talked with National Grid, and we were able to get the street lights turned off. Essentially, they came around and unscrewed the light bulbs for us on the night of that. We had to do a trial run that involved bringing out a generator, a pull-behind generator, which is a massive thing, which also generates a lot of exhaust and generates a lot of noise. And so you have to keep in mind that will be there when you're thinking about what kinds of events or other works can go on around it, and about where the proper location for it is going to be, because basically you need to have, I think the smallest throw that can be accommodated on the projector that we have, I want to say it's about 26 feet. And you also need to know well in advance, because most of these lenses, even when they're zoom lenses, you would be surprised at how narrow the range can potentially be for moving back and forth. You need to really know exactly where you're going to set up the projector. Do you have permissions to set it up there? That's another thing to keep in mind. And you need to let the technical producer know that well in advance, because that lens is probably going to have to be rented. It's probably not something that we'll have on hand. You need to measure the throw distance using a digital tape measure that can measure up to 200 feet. If it's beyond that, we are going to have some trouble measuring it. Even with that, in certain circumstances, it can be very difficult to measure. And there needs to be, I would say that one of the key design elements is going to be some flexibility. You need to have something that ideally is not going to require a massive amount of specificity to be a successful installation.